Wakanda Forever is playing now in theaters. And I'm basically going to talk about this movie as if you have seen it. This movie is estimated to make about $300 million in its opening weekend. That is more than Black Adam made in the span of about 3 weeks of being out. So I'm sorry if you're not gonna go watch this movie. I don't know who you are. So I'm not gonna sit. I hate with Marvel movies sugarcoating it and playing like, oh, it's non-spoiler. I get the point of non-spoiler reviews, but it's like, is anyone that skeptical about watching this shit? Everybody's gonna watch this shit, you know. Everyone's gonna watch these movies. Everyone's gonna talk about these movies, and let's not pretend that it's any other way than that. So I just want to talk about this movie openly and spoiler free, or well, spoilery and shit. I don't think anything I will say will actually ruin the experience besides talk about the end credit stuff. But other than that, I think that like this movie is pretty easy to figure out. Um, I think this movie is going to be overhyped no matter what I say about this movie. Chadwick Boseman's death has left a mark on the movie. Most of this movie is dedicated to him, so most people are going to go out feeling a certain way and not really think about the filmmaking or the shit that's actually there on display. I will state the positives first before I go into the negatives of this movie because I have a lot of negatives with this movie. The performances are phenomenal here. Um, Angela Bassett as the Queen has been talked about getting a Best Actress nomination, and I could see her getting a nomination. Definitely not a win. She does not have enough scenes in this movie, and there are a couple very powerful scenes, but for the most part, the scenes in this movie where she's given really strong performances are just amazing. But next, I want to talk about is um, Namor. I did really like Namor in this movie, though I had issues with him that I'll get into when I get into my negatives. Um, However, I did not. Well, I guess we'll state that for negatives. Um, I did like the tributes to Chadwick. I did think they were nice and all, and it was nice to see that. I think anyone who watches this movie, whether they hate it or not, can at least acknowledge there are nice tributes to this wonderful character and all that shit. So let's get into this negatives with this movie. I'm sorry, but this movie is pretty close to being a bad movie. I don't think it is. I think it's just a meh movie. And the reason why is because this is an action movie. You know, it is a superhero movie. And all the action scenes, the first one starts, it's a chase from the feds. The CGI is not great in this movie for the most part. And this sequence was so incredibly dark and hard to see that it was just awful. And there were several action scenes throughout this runtime that were just ugly to look at, whether it be because of the CGI or because of the fact that the scenes were just too dark. Our version of Atlantis with Namor and stuff couldn't even get a really good look at it. I was thinking about Aquaman because it's the easiest comparison in your brain, obviously. And how I could see the life, I could see the energy and how beautiful that world looks. Even when the CG wasn't great, I could see how pretty though it was trying to look. In this movie, I can't see it. It was all ugly because it was so dark. And that was a lot of sequences in this movie. I'm like, why did they put it like this or do that? It's very confusing. The editing in this movie ruined a lot of the action sequences and just other sequences too, and made this movie ridiculously long. There is no reason this movie needed to be 2 hours and 40 minutes. It could have been 2 hours 20, but so many sequences were just so awkwardly put together or clunky. The character of Ironheart, while I did not hate that character and would like to see that character again in other things, had no business being a part of this plot. You feel like they could have set up this plot and made it work without that. Same thing with the FBI stuff. It was something that moved this plot in motion, but also didn't. It was very confusing, very clunky, and you almost forget the FBI was part of the movie. Um, it was very weird. Namor telling his backstory, an interesting backstory, but the way they explain it makes it very clunky and hard to understand. Even the character in the scene with him while he's explaining the backstory is like, "Why are you telling me all this?" And it's not. And it's just bizarre, so awkwardly put together, and just that's the whole vibe from this movie. It feels like everybody was so distraught over Chadwick's death, but and that they ended up putting together a project that was very clunky, and I don't want to say half-assed because it definitely wasn't. The heart was in the right place. These performances were good, but you're watching it going, why would you do this shit? Why would you put it together like this? I was very confused throughout most of it, and I just don't understand this movie at all. I don't understand the action sequences. I don't understand what they were going for at certain scenes. Like, again, when Namor was explaining his backstory, I'm like, I get you have to explain that backstory, but why was it put together in that way? A lot of the action scenes, I get there needs to be an action scene. Why was it put together like that? I get that you need to introduce Ironheart at some point, but why was she in this movie? Why would it? It's a lot of those questions were coming into my mind, and it just made me frustrated because I wanted to love this movie, but it's just not a good movie. I don't even want to say it's a bad movie. It's okay because there's enough good things that make this at least worth watching once, but I'll never watch this movie again. And that's kind of how I feel about the first Black Panther. But the first Black Panther, I think, actually had less going for it because the two strongest things about this movie are Namor uh, and uh, and the score. Those are great elements of this movie. And Namor is the villain of this movie. So in the first movie, the strongest element of that movie was Killmonger and the score. So they're kind of equal movies to me in my mind, even though this one I think is slightly worse just because I feel like Black Panther is an easier movie to watch. It's not almost freaking 3 hours when it doesn't need to be. Um, just awful. In some scenes, it's truly awful. This movie was in some scenes. It was kind of hard. I don't know. I'm still trying to process everything I felt about this movie. Let's get into the end credit scene. So the way they did this end credit scene was nonsense. There really should not have been an end credit scene because what it was is Shuri at the end of the movie goes down to the beach, starts crying on the beach. Then it cuts to Chadwick's former lover. And she's like, I had a son. His name's T'Challa, and we wanted him to grow up away from the throne and blah blah blah. Cool. I don't really give. Okay, so that's a nice tribute to Chadwick, but there's no but that should just been the ending of the movie. Was that? And then you know, why did you need to make people sit through the credits for that? It just felt very awkward because it was part of the scene that you were playing that you abruptly cut off to show some credits, and it was just very confusing. And that's just a lot of this movie is like they edited these scenes and put them together weird that it made for a very messy movie with some incredible performances, a really good score, and it's at certain points some nice cinematography though. A lot of the cinematography I'd actually say was quite bad in this movie because good cinematography is not only supposed to be an interesting visual of what you're supposed to look at, but also is supposed to give you what you're supposed to look at. Several points in this movie, I'm like, what am I even supposed to be looking at here? So I don't know. I don't know how to feel about this movie. I guess the other major spoiler thing I could talk about is Eric Killmonger's return and the idea of Shuri not wanting to go for revenge and stuff. But I don't know. Is I don't know. That was cool, I guess, but it did feel weird. But yeah, I did not care for this movie. I was very frustrated by a lot of this movie, and a lot of people are saying this is the best of Phase Four. This is absolutely not. This is the worst of Phase Four, and anyone that tells you otherwise is probably overwhelmed by their feelings of Chadwick Boseman's death. To be honest, and I think that's really something that we really need to look at and address because, especially these critics, okay, your job is to talk about the filmmaking and what's in front of you, and what's in front of you is not Chadwick Boseman die. What's in front of you is a film with actors, who are acting their hardest, but there's a clunky story, there's clunky effects, there's clunky editing, the actual filmmaking, which is at the heart of each film. It was not great.